And over the years, I've come to understand the power of deception and how it manifests itself in many ways, and how difficult it is for people who have been deceived over time to accept new interpretations, particularly if they conflict with what people believe to be true. So this is the dilemma that I'm faced with, particularly when I discuss this issue with my people. See, because what I found over the years is that you can talk to our folk about history. You know, you can talk about the pyramids, you can talk about science, you can talk about philosophy, you can talk about engineering, you can talk about medicine, you can talk about all these great things, philosophical things, but when it comes to talking about religion, folk don't want to hear it. And they don't want to hear it because they're afraid of hearing something that's going to challenge what they believe in. And so the challenge for me is, and has been for the last 10 years or so, is how do you enlighten the followers of a minister who makes his living presenting falsehoods as sacred truths, particularly when neither the parishioners or the pastor realizes that the falsehood was derived from a falsehood, which was derived from a falsehood, which was derived from a falsehood, which derived from a falsehood that was a deliberate distortion of spiritual truths. The issue is, or the challenge is, just because a truthful person speaks a falsehood truthfully and with conviction doesn't make that falsehood any less false. Okay? You can be convinced to believe anything. That doesn't mean that it's true. And so when I make statements like that, I always get that look. You all know that look. And people ask you, or ask me specifically if I believe in God. And my response is, no, I don't believe in God. Because a belief is something that you accept without proof. As a person of consciousness living in the world, you need to know and not believe. All right? So, personally, I don't believe in God. I know that a creator exists. I know that this creator has been called by many names, by many people. Creator's been called God, Jehovah, Ra, Atum, Jah, Olodumare, the Great Spirit, Olukalu, Father, Mother God, Allah, Oshun, Buddha, Vishnu. This one creator has been called by many names by people throughout the world. And there are as many names for this one creator as there are groups of people throughout the world. I know that it is a violation of the highest order to say that someone's relationship with God is illegitimate simply because they don't call God by the same name that you call God. That in itself is an ungodly act. I know that it is immoral to tell a people that your God is the only true God. As a person of African ancestry, I know that the God concept imposed upon my ancestors was a deliberate distortion of spiritual truth. And these deliberate distortions were designed to keep our people spiritually incarcerated, mentally impotent, and physically dependent on their former slave masters, whether they were Christian slave masters or Muslim slave masters. It's just a historical fact. See, I'm talking history here. I'm not being emotional. I'm talking history. When I was a child, I was taught to worship the God of my grandparents, a European Christian God. That's a reality. Many years later, I learned that this European Christian God was derived from concepts of God which originated in Africa. I know that I wouldn't be here today I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have a relationship with my ancestors. I know that for a fact, for a personal fact, because in November of 1998, I was in Egypt. I was in Aswan, Egypt. And I was kind of tired of doing my annual trips to Egypt, and I wanted to take a break. And I was debating whether or not I should take a group to Egypt the following year in 1999. And it was on November the 13th. I was meditating in the morning, November the 13th, by the Nile River in Aswan. And as I was really contemplating this decision for the coming year, my grandmother, who passed away a number of years ago, came to me and said, well, baby, if you don't want to go to Egypt next year, then you shouldn't go. And I said, okay. I mean, it was as simple as that. She said I shouldn't go if I didn't want to go. I really didn't want to go, so I said, I'm not going. The impact of that decision really didn't hit me until the following year, around the time when I was to have gone to Egypt. And that is that had I gone to Egypt in 1999, I would have been on that flight, Egypt Air Flight 990, that crashed in the Atlantic Ocean on October the 31st, 1999. That was the flight I always took when I made my trips to Egypt. So that, to me, was my confirmation that the Creator is real, and that the Creator works through my ancestors to keep me on point. And as long as I maintain a relationship with my ancestors and maintain a relationship with my Creator, then I will continue to be protected and guided. That's how I know that the Creator is real. So the information that I want to share with you this evening is essentially information based on my research, information based on my observations, my coming into the light, my coming to understand African spiritual traditions and their relationship to religious systems that exist, particularly Christianity, and how those religious traditions have manifested themselves throughout the years. Africans lived in America for almost 400 years. And as a result of enslavement, racism, miseducation, many of our people have been taught to deny a relationship, a loving and meaningful and spiritual relationship with Africa. That was intentional because we were supposed to be disconnected from a spiritual force that would empower us and help restore us to our right mind. I'm from Chicago, and one of the things that I was struck by in Chicago was that Chicago is a city of immigrants. But every immigrant group that came to Chicago had its own cultural community. The Jews had a part of Chicago called Jewtown. The Greeks had a section of Chicago called Greektown. Polish had their section of town. The Italians had their section of town. The Chinese had their section of town. Chinatown, Little Italy, Little Ireland. Black folk lived where? In the ghetto. You know, that's where we lived. Every one of these immigrant groups had their own economic community. Every one of them had their own educational system that catered to their cultural needs. Every one of those groups had their own special relationship to a God which looked like them. Everybody except us. We had a white God. And when I assessed what was happening in our community, we had more churches in our community than most of these other folk did. We had churches on every corner. But we had more crime. We were beaten up by the police and shot by the police more than any other people. We had more drugs. We had more alcohol.